Hi, Joyce Vance and the Chickens of Justice. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm happy to be the new home for the Chickens of Justice. I think that's what I'm going to rename my chicken coop.
Yeah.
We were just saying I can watch MSNBC with the sound down now and get the same enjoyment of the holy faces on you and Barb McQuaid. So you have to tell us you talked a little trash to Barb because she was the one that was on the air when the news broke about the raid.
It wasn't really trash. Like, I was amazed. What do you do when you're on television and somebody whispers in your ear, they've just searched Mar-a-Lago? So all honor to Barb McQuaid, who is truly a scholar and a gentlewoman.
She just, right. She kept her, you're like, where's your poker face, Barb? I mean, I have to say, even for you, like, solid, calm professionals, this is a lot this week. I mean, just those of us that aren't lawyers are like, oh my God.
Right.
And now Scott Perry's phone. I mean, talk to us about, I don't even know where to start with the legal significance of this week, but go ahead.
So maybe one way of looking at it, this is probably the most boring way, but you know me, I'm boring.
Yeah, that's what we love about
is
you.
that today is 89 days before the midterm election.
Mm-hmm.
Mar-a-Lago was searched 91 days before the midterm election. And DOJ notoriously tries to go dark on politically complicated investigations at a period of time sufficiently far enough out from an election to avoid any allegation that they're influencing the election. You know, the ghost of Jim Comey sort of lingers over that whole thing.
I'm glad
So
you
it
got to
makes
him
sense
before I
that-
did. Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
early. If DOJ had stuff to do, it makes sense that we would see it happening this week.
Mm-hmm.
And so now they've got 90 days to quietly sort through what they obtained at Mar-a-Lago. We have no idea what that is. And figure out, let's just put this on the table early. Two things could be going on at Mar-a-Lago, assuming the reporting is correct that this is about national security classified papers. One is there could be a criminal investigation going on. These cases are rarely prosecuted, but there are some factors here that suggest that there'd be good reason to investigate and consider that. Possibly more importantly are the national security implications. And whenever you have a spill of classified evidence, you got to figure out what's involved in the spill and whether or not there is risk to national security. So, we've got a former president who notoriously sat at dinner at Mar-a-Lago and sort of crowdsourced advice on how to handle a Korean missile launch. There's no telling what he would do with papers. The important thing is that government needs to understand what's happened and what the risks are.
The one thing we were brought up is that, of course, Kash Patel said, he declassified this already. Even though it's not in the paperwork, of course. He's just like, I just heard him say it. How does that stand up legally?
Yeah, so there's a whole lot here, and we don't know all of the answers. Could Trump have declassified everything he took to Mar-a-Lago? Sure, he could have. But it's not, you don't just get to wave a magic wand and say declassified. There's actually some formalistic stuff that has to go along with that to make sure that it happens. And we just don't know the answer. Did Trump declassify everything that was in his possession? Maybe Joe Biden could turn around and reclassify it. I mean, I think that that's just silly. And if the argument that you're making at this point is it was all declassified, well, why not just say that to the government when it shows up on your doorstep in Mar-a-Lago? We know that at least since June there have been negotiations going on to get some materials back, probably a lot earlier, to be honest.
Yeah.
So if it was just that simple, and if Trump was able to establish that the materials were declassified, DOJ would never have been able to get the probable cause to go in with a search warrant.
You got there ahead of me. It's almost like you have a fancy law degree and I don't. Okay. I was just going to say that, so you can't say abracadabra or Beetlejuice.
You do not need a law degree to understand this stuff. And something I regret that we do as lawyers is mystify it and use funky language.
Yeah.
This is Americana. We should all understand how this stuff works, and you obviously do.
Well, you said it on Twitter. Probable cause is more than just suspicion. It means a reasonable person reviewing the evidence would conclude a crime has been committed, and there's good reason to believe evidence or fruits of it will be recovered from the place to be searched. And I assume the bar for not just a lawyer, but a former president's home has got to be really high.
Well, I think it was pretty high. Look, that bar is something that DOJ lawyers take seriously, because you know what happens if you don't take it seriously is that you have the professional embarrassment of being in a federal district judge's chambers or a magistrate judge's chambers and having them tell you, hey, your warrant is thin. There's not enough here for me to sign off on. And no prosecutor wants to have that happen. It diminishes your credibility. So we used to, when I was at DOJ, work very hard to bolster the credibility of our search warrants. In this case, there is no doubt that this search warrant affidavit was fly-specced by the Deputy Attorney General Lisa Monaco, who's looked at a lot of search warrant affidavits during her career, and I'm 105% certain that Merrick Garland himself would have signed off on this one before it went to an independent federal judge who would have looked at it with extraordinary care before he or she put their name on the search warrant.
So from here, you said lots of options here, everything from classified documents to other crimes, but whatever it is, the judge who issued the warrant would have been rigorous about determining there was sufficient probable cause. Joyce, when might we hear something about this, or if at all? What the warrant was, what they found, what they didn't find, what's going on?
Well, let me talk about when we should hear about it. DOJ does not litigate its cases in the news, and I'm amused, I'll say amused rather than using a word I shouldn't use on radio, that Mitch McConnell and others have been outraged. They're outraged, and they're demanding that DOJ talk about the case.
Right.
So just sort of play that out and imagine that Merrick Garland took the podium this morning, or that Chris Wray, the director of the FBI, took the podium and said, here is all of the evidence that we have that Donald Trump was involved in committing crimes. If one of them publicly went out and said that, there would be outrage. DOJ is trying to dirty up these people before they've even charged them. You know,
Yeah.
we would hear. DOJ, it is not DOJ's job to truck in speculation and rumor and preliminary information. We will hear from DOJ if they indict folks. We
Wow.
will see an indictment, and DOJ will limit at that time its communications with the public to what's in the four corners of the indictment. And the point in time where we would properly find out what they learned during this search is if there's a trial,
Okay.
when the evidence is released, or if there's a guilty plea, when the government proffers what its evidence at trial would have looked like.
Okay. Because I'm
It's
running
not
out.
very satisfying for people
Well,
like
I'm-
you and me.
I'm running out
but
of party
it's the
wi-
right thing.
I'm running out of party whistles, so I just need to know how to plan for what's next and when. Neil Katyal said, search of Trump abusive. Law enforcement leaves a copy of the search warrant, which itemizes what they're looking for and what laws were violated. If Trump RNC thinks this search signed off on by a federal judge is abusive and they have nothing to hide, release the warrant to the public, which they will never do. Correct?
I don't think that they will, because I suspect it would be pretty incriminating. But so I need to write a piece about this, and thank you for the reminder. We say search warrant, but really it's sort of an accumulation of paper. The government fills out an application to obtain a search warrant. That's a document that I would love to see, because it would probably list in some detail the criminal statutes that DOJ was investigating, the crimes, right? It would identify, here's what crimes we think might have been committed. We're not going to see that, because that's one of the pieces of paper that gets sealed. Then there's the search warrant itself. That's what the judge signs off on. That's what Trump has. And at the top of that search warrant, there's a box that calls for some findings about, you know, why a search is being authorized or what you're being authorized to search. And usually, because it's too much information to put in that little box, DOJ lawyers write, see attachment B. Well, what Trump has and what he could share with us is the search warrant itself and attachment B, which most likely is an inventory of the property that is to be searched, or I should say an explanation of the what's going to be searched, and then an inventory of what DOJ took. Expect that to be heavily redacted in this case because of national security concerns. It might just be very vague. Materials obtained in search of safe or something like that.
Yeah.
And then there's the agent's affidavit. An FBI agent has to file a sworn affidavit. It's under oath, but it can contain hearsay, like, you know, so-and-so told me X, a confidential, reliable informant told me X. And that, too, is sealed, and we won't see that. So the two pieces of paper we'd most like to see are sealed and out of reach, I'd still like to see the warrant and attachment B that's sitting in Trump's possession.
Yeah. Well, okay. So I have to ask you, the House Judiciary GOP tweeted, if they can do it to a former president, imagine what they can do to you. And you just said, so it's official. The Republican Party is no longer the party of law and order. You talked about Kevin McCarthy. He's trying to distract from the momentous day where the AG, FBI director, and federal judge all agreed probable cause existed that evidence of a crime would be found at Trump's home. Are even you surprised by this party? That they are now, and the former president, speculating openly about, did they plant evidence? Which to me says they know they found something incriminating already. They're already going with all these conspiracy theories, abuse of power, planted evidence. Are you surprised by that?
I'm not surprised at all. This just seals the deal. This is the party of Trump. They're willing to abandon cherished Republican principles like support for law and order. I mean, surprise, who would have thought that the far right and the far left would now be in agreement about defunding the police? But we're hearing cries from people on the right to defund the FBI. It's just mishugas.
Yeah. Okay. Well, by the way, you said what's the over-under and how long it takes for Trump to send out a fundraising email? That was already done, I think, seconds after you tweeted that. So, so let's go to Scott Perry, because speaking of this whole party, how significant is that? I mean, he's someone that we know asked for a pardon. As Allison Gill points out, do you know on at least 5 occasions Representative Scott Perry, who just had his phone seized, texted Meadows to move their chat to Signal? A lot of speculation that it's Meadows that's cooperating. I mean, do you have any thoughts behind this raid and the Scott Perry seizure being one day apart?
So Cassidy Hutchinson, I think, was the one who testified that Mark Meadows burned papers after a meeting with Scott Perry in his White House office. Like, how weird is that? And of course, we know that Perry introduced then President Trump, to Jeff Clark, this sort of the environmental lawyer at DOJ who aspired to become the Attorney General, and was willing to perpetuate the big lie on the American people in order to get that job. So lots of interesting speculation around Perry. So here's the deal. If I was still a prosecutor, I would actually want to have Perry as a witness. I might want to prosecute him and make him take a felony, and be willing to give him sentencing consideration to get his testimony. But his testimony could be very important here. However, as you find out, there's a lot of speculation around Mark Meadows, whose last text, I think, was when a Republican congresswoman was recently killed in a car crash, maybe not more than a week ago. And he texted about that, or he tweeted about that, but his Twitter feed has been very light. His public presence has been very light. Lots of speculation about whether or not he could be trying to conduct a deal with the government for his testimony.
Sisters-in-law, we were saying before I met all y'alls, you tweeted about having everybody sit on your front porch, Jill Winebanks and Barb McQuaid and you, and talk. And I'm like, oh my God, can I come? I won't say anything. And that is exactly what Sisters-in-law is. It is so fantastic, this idea, to hear all of you guys. And you were saying it's your therapy, but it's so instructive for the rest of us to get to hear legal talk at that level. And you guys are all just fantastic.